Good evening. This is Kiana, and today we are going to be discussing cyber harassment, cyber espionage, cyber intimidation, cyberbullying. We're going to be talking about the whole thing. Now, I need to be honest, I don't know a lot about this subject from an intellectual perspective. I'm still learning about it, still reading a lot of information on it. And so, as we are talking about this, if you have any information that you'd like to share, please leave it in the comments below. But I do have some questions that I would like to ask you. Um, and it really just has to do with your perceptions of your experiences online and how you navigate the world of cyberspace. And so we're going to get into those questions. And so the first question that I would like to ask you is if you, and because we're talking about cybercrime and cyber victims, these questions are more uh, geared toward any person that has been a victim of a cybercrime. So my first question is, how did the actions of the perpetrator impact your sense of security in the digital world and your day-to-day life? So if you were a victim of a cybercrime, the perpetrator, you understood that there was a perpetrator in this particular situation. How did that impact you? Like, how did you deal with it? What were some things that you did to report the incident? Um, and so, my second question is, what do you believe motivated the perpetrator to attack you specifically? And how does this affect your perception of their character? And let's ask another question just to get a sense of what this is. Why are we dealing with this? So in your interactions with authorities, and so for example police services, how do you feel, you know did they seem to understand that this was a cyber crime? Did they understand that this was a crime against you? So one thing that I'm learning about in this situation when we are talking about cyber crime, cyber criminals, I'm learning that in these spaces of being online and dealing with being, victimology, being a victim of a cyber incident, I'm learning that what often is happening is that the burden of proof is shifting to the victim to prove that there is a crime occurring. So, in certain jurisdictions, what I am reading online, what I'm witnessing is that victims so people that have become victim of a cybercrime, and I'm speaking like somebody's taking over your social media accounts, someone's taking over your email accounts, somebody's actually hacking into your personal accounts, somebody's taking your information, your finances, they're altering information online that people are seeing about you. And what I've learned is that authority figures are asking victims to produce a suspect themselves. In other words, authority figures are asking the victims to conduct the investigation. So now the victim has, one, experienced a horrific incident. Two, they've gone to law enforcement for their support and their assistance, and they're being told that they don't really investigate those kind of crimes, that's not within their jurisdiction to investigate. That really what often happens is the kind of crimes that they, well, I'm not going to say the kind of crimes, but in these particular situations, what often happens is that the victim has to investigate the crime themselves. The victim has to say, this is the person that is behind a laptop. This is the person who is behind a computer. And you have to go and trace down the victim yourself. And you have to bring that, trace down the perpetrator yourself and bring that perpetrator to the police department just so they can look at them. And a lot of times, maybe they don't even do anything from that point. And then you have to actually prosecute the case yourself, because the prosecutor's not going to prosecute a cyber criminal. So you have to do that yourself. And now it raises the question, it sounds ludicrous, right? But that's really how it is in certain jurisdictions. But what it does is it raises the question, ladies and gentlemen, as to whether or not police are, one, investigating real crimes, two, whether or not law enforcement is using their intelligence capacities responsibly, and three, whether or not they're surveilling the right people, right? And so if we had the answer to that question, I think we'd all be rich. But what I know for sure is that there is an element to this, a psychological element to this, that cyber criminals, I'll explain it. So oftentimes when we are talking about cybercrime and we are talking about victims such as human rights defenders, journalists, activists, we are speaking of a phenomenon known as transnational repression. Transnational repression is where the state reaches across their borders. So for instance, if a victim if a national is in a foreign country and their country is trying to silence their dissent, one of the ways in which they'll try and silence that person's dissent is through cyber intimidation, cyber harassment. And so under this phenomenon of transnational repression, there's also like a psychological element to it as well. And it's a psychological element known as cognitive hacking. And so, what is that? And I'm going to be reading just a definition from TechSlang. And they say that cognitive hacking is a cyber attack where the threat actors manipulate victims' perceptions by exploiting their psychological weaknesses, attacking primarily so these attackers primarily use disinformation in their campaigns to fuel biases and prejudices. So, what is an example of a campaign? What is an example of a psychological weakness? So, an example of a psychological weakness is that sometimes, as victims of cyber crimes, we don't understand why we are being profiled, why we are being selected, why we are being attacked by the cyber criminal. So we don't have this intelligence with us, and I don't think most of us do. All we can say is that, we are a public speaker speaking out against A, B, and C. And maybe our opinions and our thoughts are, a cyber criminal is feeling triggered by our thoughts and our opinions. And the only way they know that they can't go up to us and have a conversation with us about it. They know that they can't actually attack us in person. So the way that their new attack or their mode of attack is to attack us online through cyber incidents, because it's a very difficult crime to prove. It's all happening online. And just as a cyber criminal can change something online, they can change it back. So let's say, for instance, I'm a journalist and I write an article about corruption, right? And we have politicians who enlist a cyber firm to actually alter all the articles that I'm writing. So when I go online now, the content has changed, right? And so I see that the content has changed, and I go to my superiors and I say, hey, there's something wrong with the article. There's content that's changed on it. And by the time that I go to the superior and I report that the content has changed, the cyber hackers have changed it back. So now you can see that it looks as if, one, that there was never any alteration of the content. Two, it cast doubt on the victim's testimony. And three, it sows doubt in the minds of other people as to what the victim is saying. And so this is often happening today online to victims. We have cyber criminals because, of course, this is their expertise and this is their livelihood. And what they do, unfortunately, is they spend a lot of time online working to sow dissent, working to sow doubt. And there is a um, a theory behind that is that it is called the Martha Mitchell effect. And so if with the Martha Mitchell effect, what happens often is if you complain about a crime or you complain about a corruption incident, that complaint is often seen as, it's often discounted as something else. So oftentimes in these situations when cyber criminals are working behind the scenes and they're changing information or they're stopping you from being able to get into your account. So let's take that for example. A cyber criminal is blocking your access to get into an account. And after they have blocked your access to get into an account and you complain to IT about it, and then after you make the complaint, and then what happens is that IT looks it over and they see, okay, well, now you can log into your account. So it seems as if there was never an issue to begin with. This is a new form of psychological manipulation that is happening to journalists, activists, and human rights defenders. Is to actually discredit the journalist, is actually to discredit the human rights defender, the activist, to make it appear as if the person is losing their mind and unsure of the things that they're talking about, unable to perceive events accurately. And in this book, I didn't find a lot of information in it, but it's called Cyber Psychology, the Study of Individuals, Society, and Digital Technologies. And so one thing that I found interesting was when it talked about deception online. And so we'll go to that definition. And so again, I didn't find a lot of useful information in this book, so I might, return it back in, but there was this very useful definition. And of course, if you want to check this out, it's called Cyber Psychology, the Study of Individuals, Society, and Digital Technologies. It's by Monica T. Whitty and Gary Young. And so they state that they have a chapter, it's called Online Deception. And so there's two authors that define what this is, and that is Buller and Burgoon. And both authors define deception online as a message knowingly transmitted by a sender to foster a false belief or conclusion by the received. And so another scholar defines this as deception as when we undertake to deceive others intentionally, we communicate messages meant to mislead them, meant to make them believe what we ourselves don't believe. And so when we're thinking about this, for example, we understand that cyber criminals don't really believe that the victim is being locked out of their account, because of course it's them locking them out of the account, and they know that they are going to let that victim back into the account, so they really understand that that account is really not blocked. But to a victim who is experiencing cybercrime, in their opinion and through their perception, by logging in, putting in their username and password, and trying to gain access to their account but can't get in, it definitely appears to be a legitimate cyber attack. And so what what the perpetrators get out of this is the fact that there is one, the victim is trying to figure out what is happening, so that is taking a lot of the victim's time. Two, the victim is going to different places to try and understand whether or not that they can receive information about what is going on. It's kind of like a fact-finding process. They're trying to understand, okay, well, what is going on in this particular situation? And so all the time that the victim is being put through this cyber uh, experience, this negative cyber experience, the cyber hackers are laughing and giggling behind the scenes, and they're changing the information back. So when the victim goes to superiors or people, heads of institutions that have the power to investigate the situation, what they do is they revert the information back to the way it was. So it appears as if the victim didn't perceive events accurately. Maybe the victim didn't uh, log, maybe forgot their login details. Maybe they, uh, you know, for, maybe they forgot their login details. Maybe they wrote their login details down wrong. This always falls back on the victim, never on the perpetrator. So, for example, now it's about victim. Are you sure that someone gained access to your account? Victim, are you sure that you wrote down your password accurately? Victim, are you sure that uh, you cleared the cache? Are you victim? Are you sure that you cleared the cookies? Victim, are you sure that you changed your password? Victim, are you sure that you didn't read that wrong? Victim, are you sure? Victim, are you sure? Victim, are you sure? Victim, are you sure? But it's never, okay, this victim is sure, but there is a perpetrator that is behind the scenes trying to make it appear as if the victim is unsure. So we never ever take it a step further to, um, put the onus on the people that are supposed to be in charge in monitoring like online systems. We always put the burden of proof on the victim to to okay, now prove that somebody hacked into your account, prove that somebody got into your email, prove that somebody has your credentials, prove that somebody is getting into your account, prove that somebody is trying to undermine you online. You see, the burden of proof is always resting on the victim of the crime. And that's not the way that law works, especially when it comes to evidence. The burden of proof does not rest on the victim. The victim's job is to report a crime, and that's it. And the 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 role of police and the role of people in power is to investigate that crime, right? And so let's think about this. Let's accept their thesis. Let's accept their thesis and see if this makes sense. Their thesis is that the role is on the victim to investigate the crime and to identify their perpetrator, to find their perpetrator, to track down their perpetrator, and bring that perpetrator to law enforcement. Now, think about it. If you are a victim of sexual assault, SA, just think about it. The police are telling you that it is your job to go and look for the person that did that to you. And not only to go look for that person that did that to you, but to bring that person to the police station. And not only to bring that person to the police station, but to convince them to tell the police that they did that to you. Or you have just been robbed. So you're walking down the street, you just left dinner and you're walking to your car and somebody takes your purse, right? And they run away with your purse. Now police are telling you that you need to go and find that person who just took your purse. And not only do you have to go find that person that took your purse, you got to convince that person to come with you to the police station. And if you can manage to convince that person to come with you to the police station, then you got to convince them to admit that they took your purse, that they robbed you, and they have to admit that to the police. And that's all your job. The police they don't do anything up until that point. They only get involved once you have brought the victim to them, that you have convinced, well, first, they don't do anything until you have found the victim first, until you have convinced or you have brought that victim, convinced that victim to come with you along to the police station, and you have convinced the victim to incriminate themselves in front of the police. Only then will police get involved. Do you see how ludicrous that sounds? Do you see how demented that sounds, that this policy is for victims of crime? Is that now the victim has to do all the work themselves? And it raises the question as to whether the reason why law enforcement are not investigating crimes of this magnitude and of this capacity, it raises the question as to whether or not like they are somehow themselves involved. Because we know that if you look back, there are a lot of stories where police officers are actually colluders in a lot of street crime. And so it raises the question, and of course we know that in the United States there have been like a lot of street crime within law enforcement departments. So again, it raises the question as to whether or not there's being like kickbacks that are being given to law enforcement for their acquiescence and their agreement to not investigate criminal activity that is happening online. It's all something that maybe I'll look into, something that like I'll be looking into soon. So this is Kiana, and you can follow me on Twitter at Kiana_Canada, Kiana_Canada. You can also follow me on Facebook by just typing in my name, Kiana Canada. There is a link in my YouTube profile. And then you can follow me here, and you can subscribe to this channel at Real Kiana Canada, at Real Kiana Canada. And we are going to be continuing this discussion on transnational repression in an upcoming video, but this is just kind of, what are your opinions about this? Like, have you been in a situation where the police has demanded that you investigate your own victimhood or demand that you investigate uh, a crime that you have been a victim of. Have you ever been a victim of cybercrime? Has somebody attempted to shape your thoughts and perceptions online? And if so, how? And like, what was your experience with that? And how did you make it through it? And uh, what are you doing about it now? And so these are all questions that I have on this incident. I can't wait to hear your answers if there are any, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.